going to make 7,000 pounds of cheese. And initially, when you read that, it sounds like a lot, but that relates to basically one tractor trailer load of milk. And when you compare that to every 9 minutes, one arriving and having to unload, there's a lot more milk out there that's got to go someplace. A week and a half ago, we had loaded up a truck ready to go to New York City because we're trying to support the food banks and other programs that they are giving away food for. And they were unable to take it because they don't have the infrastructure there that's necessary in order to even pass out the food. So we've held on to that, and now we're shipping it down in much smaller quantities that they can adjust to. Governor Cuomo had announced a New York initiative to move both cheese and yogurt into New York City, and we'll be participating in that. And we have lined up about 1.5 million pounds of cheese to go into New York City to be given away over the course of the next 2 or 3 months. So we are using masks and face shields now within the manufacturing facilities to keep people safe. In Vermont, we've had very little outbreaks. In upstate New York, very little outbreaks. But as I've said the last few weeks, West Springfield, Mass is still a hotbed for us. They're running about 150 to 170 new outbreaks a day in that area. And it has flattened, but it has not gone down. So tensions are still very high amongst those people. And we look to try to give them new and different rewards if we can. And certainly adding the face shields to the mask was a real help for the people in West Springfield. Within our butter making operation, which is done there, the people tend to be about 4 feet apart when they're at their closest. So it's a little bit closer than the social distancing would tell you that you would want to be. As we are now looking at bringing our admin people back, we have to try to do that slowly. And we have a lot of people that are in cubicles. So we now have to have plexiglass partitions built on top of the cubicles before we can bring people back into our buildings as part of the Vermont state regs on admin people sitting in areas that don't give you 6 feet of distance between the other folks. They'll also have to wear face masks when they're at work, which is going to be a little bit different for those folks. And we're also going to split it so that half the people might come in on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the other half on Tuesday and Thursday. And we have a lot of people that would like to get out of their houses and come back to work. And we didn't actually think that was going to happen. We thought once they got into their house, they weren't going to want to work at all. But now they've decided, they don't like just sitting around their house so much. So they're looking for something different to do. As the country is opening up, though, we're also preparing for a potentially large spike in the outbreak across the country. And as you look at that, the food supply is going to be the next thing that's really going to be affected. You're hearing a lot about chicken, pork, beef, the facilities that were down. They're now trying to figure out how to bring them back up. They're bringing them up at less than full capacity at this point. But as the outbreak spreads and goes into some of the rural areas where these large processing facilities are, we're going to see some shortages. And we talked a little bit about last week. I think somebody had mentioned there was chicken that they weren't able to find at one point, and they're going through and they're limiting a variety of things. So from the standpoint of making food a priority, Trump has called an emergency doctrine on food, and in the absolute worst case, they will actually send in the National Guard to work within the processing plants in order to keep the food supply going. That's never happened before, but it's within his authority. I don't know how well our armed forces are going to be at actually chopping apart a cow. They might be okay shooting it, but I'm not sure that they're going to be okay actually butchering it properly. So that will be interesting. In the state of Vermont, we're in a kind of a unique position because we have small slaughterhouses within the state that handle a lot of either the organic or grass-fed beef and the poultry and hogs that we have. So we actually have a pretty good food supply as long as people from other states don't come in and try to take it all away from us. So tonight, as I'm kind of wrapping up this whole thing, I said that I would talk about the spread of the virus, why it's here to some extent, and also give what I hope is a kind of apolitical talk about what are our politicians doing to either help us or hinder us or move in the right direction. And actually, this virus has two different forms to it. So a lot of times you hear about the European version and the Chinese version. And the Chinese version where they believe it started, and every day you can look at a new conspiracy theory of whether it was created in a lab or whether it came out of some rural area. But it's actually been with us for probably 6 to 8 weeks longer than most people would realize. And that's because you don't get to a critical mass where people actually realize it. The first few people that had this no doubt died, and nobody even really realized what they were dying of. And they're only now going back and discovering and testing these people that had previously died to find out if this is what it really was. It was just considered to be a mysterious illness of an older person, and they passed away. But the significance of the two varieties is that the variety that started in China was not nearly as contagious as the variety that it mutated into in Italy. And what we ended up with in this country, for the most part, turned out to be the European version of this, which was carried to the US mostly through New York City, through the New York airports. So you think of all the traffic that goes between here and Europe, and bringing it in. On the West Coast, that would have initially come in through China, but that virus also mutated into this highly contagious one at the end. So now what they're dealing with is a much different animal than what they saw or what they have been experiencing within China and within Korea. I believe that the virus that has resurfaced in both Singapore and in Japan, and as I talked last week, Singapore thought that they had this thing licked about 8 weeks ago, and they had no outbreaks. And then about a month ago, they brought students back into Singapore, and some of them had this very contagious version of it. And in Singapore, they went from 0 to 1,000 outbreaks a day for about 2.5 weeks before they finally got it back under control to some extent. And now they're ranging about 300 to 400 a day. Similar thing happened in Japan, and specifically in Tokyo, where they were basically at 0, and they very quickly went to almost 2,500. And then in Japan, they had a complete lockdown. The problem with the US versus all these countries is when you think of Japan, you think of Japanese people. When you think of China, you think of Chinese people. When you think of Americans, you think of Chinese people, European people, South American people. It is truly a mixing pot of all sorts of different cultures coming together. And all of those cultures have different traditions about how they will meet and how close their families are and the travel. So a political doctrine that says everybody's going to stay at home is different for all of these different groups. Whereas if you were in Japan, you'd be talking to Japanese people, you say all Japanese people will have to act exactly this way. When you tell Americans, all Americans are going to have to act this way, it doesn't happen. They just can't do that. You see things like people with masks that have rebel flags on them, or Noah would probably have one that would have a skull and a crossbone on it. Other people would have robins or eagles, or in my case, I have one that's a Holstein cow, right? So everybody has a different look. But if you look at some of these other countries, specifically if you go to any of the communist countries, the masks are all exactly the same. There's no individuality of it. So we can't even get to a common look for a mask. Everybody's got to have their own feel and their own thing. And after 2 or 3 weeks, Americans just don't do the cooped up thing very well. They're used to a very free-floating society. They're used to being able to travel and go anywhere they want and basically do whatever they want. And what they really like to do is to be entertained. And that is go to movies, go out to dinner, go to concerts, go to sports, all of these things that have become ingrained in the American society and also ingrained in our entire economy. Because people are spending money, and then other people get that money and then they spend it on other things. When all of these things stop and the economy comes to a screeching halt, the way our economy did, you actually find out that in order for people to survive, there's only about maybe 15% of the population that's actually working in that area. So that would be people that are raising food, processing food, delivering food, working in grocery stores. That might be people that are building buildings, people that are in charge of the electrical system or oil for energy. It's a very small part of our population. And we're very fortunate from that standpoint because we have machines that do the majority of that heavy lifting. But the rest of us are going on cruises, and on those cruises, there's a lot of service people that are working on those cruises. And that's just a free-floating economy of money. Then you get to the restaurants in New York City, and depending on what you do, many people in New York prior to this had actually not made meals in their home. They might make a sandwich or something like that, but actually cooking and thinking about it was completely foreign to them. So going to a grocery store and actually having to decide what you were going to buy at a grocery store and bring it home and then figure out how you were going to cook it was a completely new experience. And the jokes about it are really quite amazing. It's that half of America learned how to cook and the other half of America became drunks because they couldn't learn how to cook. So you have these two vastly different looks as to what America is going to be like when it comes out of this thing. But as you go back to the virus, a lot of people call it the flu, but it's not like the flu. It's very different from a flu that we would understand. For instance, it's an upper respiratory flu, right? And it's a virus that looks like a flu, but it doesn't look like that in everybody. In many people, it doesn't look like anything. In fact, some of you may have had this and not know it. I wonder whether I might have had this and not known it at this point in time. Some people have walked into a hospital not feeling very well, and by that night have died, that it has taken over their body. While it affects many people in their lungs, and they can't breathe and they go on respirators. I actually had a friend who passed away about 3 weeks ago, and he was on a respirator. They thought that he was going to get pneumonia. He started to recover from that, and suddenly he developed a secondary thing, which was blood clots, which is something else that they've seen in about a third of the patients. That's not normal for a virus. And so they don't really know how to fight this. There's over 90 different trials that are already going on. So there's a lot of people who think they have a solution and an immunization for this, but now they have to try it out on people. So how do you feel about that? They're going to inject you with something and you don't know if it's going to work or not work. But human trials are already going on in a variety of countries, including our own country. And they were talking about how do you speed it up, because everybody says, well, if you can get the FDA to approve it, then you got to make all the drugs, then you have to get them onto the market. And everybody talks in terms of, it's probably a year and a half or 2 years before we have a solution to the problem. Well, what drug companies are doing is, if they think that they have the drug that's going to work in their initial clinical trials, while the FDA is going through the approval process, they will make millions and millions of immunizations. And one of the pharmaceuticals said, that company said, within 5 or 6 months, they could make 100 million immunizations if they know that they've got the right drug. So where a normal drug company would not bet on the solution until the FDA approved it from a safety standpoint, you're going to find that there's going to be a number of drug companies that are actually going to go ahead and make all of the doses that they need ahead of time, so that if they get approval, they're ready to rock and roll, which is going to cut years off of the actual pushing it out into the marketplace. And the hope would be that one of these 90 or several of these 90 drugs that are in trial now will in fact be one that really does the job. If that's true, then you're going to see immunization start as early as December or January of next year, which would be just incredible from the standpoint of the world pulling together, actually coming up with a solution. Now, the secondary part of this is, if the Chinese, for instance, come up with a solution prior to everybody else, and even if they share that with everybody else, you're going to want to immunize your own population first, and they have 1.5 billion people. So, can you still hear me? Okay, I got a line that said my is not stable. They're going to want to immunize their own country before they start making it for other countries, just as we would be doing the same thing. So that's why they talk about this scientific race that's going on around the world. There's no doubt that all the countries will share the solution with everybody else, but it's how fast do you get that solution once it's actually working for everybody. The other part is, stay at home's not a cure. If it was a cure, then this thing would just go away. And stay at home was really a measure to try to flatten the curve, to get an understanding of what it would be like in the hospitals across the country. So now we're seeing the raging debate. Do you go out or don't you go out? Do we open up society again and see what happens? Or do we keep it closed down and maybe it just goes away? And so we're kind of running a little bit of an experiment here over the course of the next month. And you've seen some of the staggering numbers that they're talking about, that if they're trying to give you a perspective of the worst case scenario, and a worst case scenario says that where we're running an infection rate across the country today of about 25,000, that by the end of June, that number could be 200,000 a day. And this thing could be rampant everywhere, with anywhere from 5 to 10,000 deaths a day for a while, as it just takes over the country. On the other hand, people also understand social distancing is important as far as controlling the spread of this. So I don't think you're going to see people just collecting the way that they did before. And so the answer is probably somewhere in between. But where we're running 25 to 30,000 a day, and where New York City has been on fire, you may find a number of other cities across the country, as they've opened them up, become very much like New York City. And figure 5 or 6 New York cities going on at one time across the country would be very tough on the medical system to try to handle. let's see. So when you start to look at whose fault is this, and they want it, and everybody wants to put blame, you're going to see over the course of the next 5 or 6 months probably the worst political campaign nightmares that anybody could imagine, as they try to put blame on whose fault is this. You know, was it the Chinese? Was it you know, a cover-up? Did it come out of a lab? Was it a complete accident? What could we have done that would have been different? The end of all of that is, this is a really highly contagious virus. And no matter what anybody says, they were not stopping it after the first 2 or 3 people got it. When the first doctor discovered it, he later died of it. So you know that he was spreading it without even knowing he was spreading it at that time. And I think the underestimating how contagious this disease was versus other viruses that have come along, and also the fact that for some people it doesn't show up as anything, has been probably the hidden nightmare in all of this. So when somebody says, I stopped the Chinese from flying to America and therefore I saved a lot of lives, what they don't say is 20,000 Americans who were in China, many of which were infected, all came back. But China actually had the least impact on this country. It was the people coming from Europe who were infected somewhere, maybe in China, or maybe even elsewhere, who brought it into this country in a very contagious, mutated version of it. And they don't talk a lot about that. But then when you saw what happened on the news, when they started to shut things down and said, oh, if you're in Europe, you can't fly here anymore. And the outraged people in Europe about the fact that they weren't going to be allowed to come to the United States. Or if you went to Europe and you came back, you were going to be quarantined for 14 days. Or if you went on a cruise, you might not get off the cruise ship for 3 months. All these kinds of things. And everybody's trying to angle, like, politically, they could have had the answer to this. None of them, it doesn't matter who was in charge, was not going to have the answer to it. Then you get to the federal government having an idea about how to handle it, and all the states having an idea. And then you get into constitutional law. And for the most part, states overrule constitutional law, because when the original Constitution was written, they did not want to have a central government that could overrule the rights of individual states. So individual states have the ability actually to do a lot of things that the government can't overrun unless the government calls for a state of national emergency in which they unite the entire country. And they didn't do that for a long time. And so some states were like, we're open, and some states were like, we're closed. But guess what? I live in Vermont. It's not going to stop me from going over to New York or Connecticut or Massachusetts, and it wasn't going to stop them from coming across the borders. So it wasn't like an individual state like Italy, where you would put up big fences and say nobody's in and nobody's out. And the spreading of this, as you can see across the country, happens in all the metropolitan areas first, and then it slowly kind of leaks out to the rural areas. And when you look at upstate New York, you've been largely unaffected by this because the governor shut it down in New York City, and he shut down the whole state at the same time. And we've been largely unaffected by this in Vermont because our governor shut down Vermont when your governor shut down New York. And in Massachusetts and Connecticut, they were actually a little bit behind New York in shutting things down, which turned out to be a huge mistake for both of them in this.
Thanks, Ed. I was
Yep.
just going to point out a quick comment from Vic that just pointing out that the Army is doing random testing because of asymptomatic people. And
Yeah, that's great.
Vic is actually serving in the National Guard and working in, what town are you in? You can tell us. Or...
I'm in Latham right now.
Latham.
Latham. I don't live here.
Latham, New York, outside of Albany, right?
Outside of Albany.
Yeah. I actually just went into Albany today to get my COVID test.
Wow.
And we were told by the medic that they're probably going to test every single person by the end of this. It's just they're doing it by random as we go.
That's fascinating. And I think we have, let's see, probably 2-3 people in Colorado and 1 person in Montana on this call. So those states have opened up a little bit. And maybe if you guys have anything to share too, feel free to pipe in with a question or a comment on how things are being handled in your states.
I'm curious what what your testing procedures are, Ed, if you're even able to test any of your employees, at all, like especially the Massachusetts plant, or is it Connecticut?
The one that's,
Yeah. Are you testing?
No, we are not authorized to do any testing. So what we do is basically we screen them every day. And we do a temperature check, but as you know, somebody that is asymptomatic is not going to show it in temperature. So we do believe we've been pretty lucky, but we have a number of employees whose spouses have worked in a variety of nursing homes and assisted living facilities. And, we immediately told them, you're not coming in for a while, right? And until we understand what your spouse is doing, what's the protective nature of what they're doing. In fact, 2 of our employees who ended up getting COVID-19 both got it from their spouses who were working in nursing homes. And as I had said last week, they were not working the prior 2 weeks as we were trying to assess the situation, and we dodged major bullets on that regard. Vermont doesn't have a lot of nursing homes outside of Burlington. So where our plants are tend to be a lot more rural, and people are very separated. And so the numbers are very low in that. Same thing with upstate New York and Chattagay, which is up by Malone. They too live in a much more isolated area. But the Vermonters have taken it very seriously. You go to a grocery store, people have a mask on, or you go to a pharmacy, and even as they're opening things up, people are being very respectful of that. Today I was talking to a person that works for me who's down in Andover, Massachusetts, which is another kind of hotbed just north of Boston. And he said, people are tired of wearing masks. They've taken the masks off, and they're just they're trying to stay a little bit away from people. But, the weather changed and it was nice, and they've decided they've kind of had it with this whole thing. So, that's the American mentality of, I don't get the flu, right? Other people get the flu, but I don't get the flu. So why would I get this particular disease?
Also, I was just gonna check in with, I believe, Catherine, you're on we have 1 phone person on the call, and if there's any questions, it's a little harder to get someone who's on an audio call only. So Catherine, feel free to pipe in at any point if you just want to ask a question, okay? And I'm getting Montana is from, this is from my sister Lindsay. Montana, yeah, you can probably read it yourself there.
Yeah, I can. So Lindsay says, Montana is good on cases, and they're opening up for tourists. Like Montana, Vermont is very much a touristy state, and the summer is our busiest also. And the states depend on that for their economy. It's an economy based on all sorts of entertainment. And one of the big entertainments, of course, is being in the outdoors during the summertime. And there's a huge fear that the country cannot just shut down like this and survive. You have to understand that the Federal Reserve is just printing money that they actually don't have. They're handing it out to people, and they expect that people will still say, okay, your money is still worth something, and you can trade that money in for goods, whatever they have. Well, if this system worked, this would be unbelievable, right? You would never have to work. The government would just send you money, and that money would be enough to do everything that you want. So they have to be careful that the amount of money that they send out is just enough money for you to survive, not for all of your general wants. And Noah understands this greatly because we talk about it all the time. What's the difference between a need and a want? So you might need food.
I don't know.
But you don't need a Lamborghini.
I do need a Lamborghini.
So the government's walking, a very fine line as to what to try to keep going. And at the end of it, they don't want to lose the airline industry. So they're going to have to bail them out. And the airline industry currently is down close to 90% on its passengers. It's hard to believe. And there's very, very few planes that are leaving out of Burlington. I think I could probably get on a jet and be one of 3 people that are flying on the jet. So people are not going to airports. It's a huge part of our commerce is done with business people, with deals back and forth. If you've been on the highways over the course of the last 3 weeks, not so many people, but now the last week, I'm amazed at how many cars I now see out on the road as they're trying to open up. So Lindsay, do you have a good plan in Montana about how they're going to open things up going forward?
I don't think they really know yet. I know that a lot. I'm a wedding and portrait photographer, and I know a lot of my weddings are just kind of the May and June ones have canceled or rescheduled, and then they're just waiting to hear about the park, Glacier National Park, which draws a lot of people. But as of now, our hotels are still not open, and I think they are trying to keep pushing those dates later. So
they did the same thing to our resort hotels at Sugarbush, at Stowe. They've closed them down. They're now talking maybe beginning of June, maybe middle of June. They'll open them up, but they're really tracking this by who's been infected at this point, how many tests have they had, going into the general population, and we're not doing any kind of random testing at this point. And so now I'll roll back to Vic and ask Vic a question. So Vic, you were tested. Are they planning to, on a random basis, or come back and test you again in a week or in 2 weeks?
So it actually all depends on units. My unit, because there's so few of us, probably won't do that, and I'm going to be leaving in a couple of weeks. So if I got tested in 2 weeks, then I'd be gone by the time I got the test results back. But we do have things we do based on if you're exposed to the virus at all, or if you might be. We have a lot of people in quarantine right now.
Yeah.
Which, we basically all stay in the same hotel. So we make sure they have food and water and everything they need, but they can't leave the hotel, and they can't have anybody come in. They can't have anybody go out. And so, I mean, if somebody did possibly get sick in between the times, then technically we might not know about it.
Right. And that is the thing with the disease, is you might not even know about it. And that person might not even know that they're a carrier.
Mm-hmm. And that's basically why we're doing the random checks, is that everybody gets tested, and then, I mean, they might retest some people, but at my pay grade, I don't know.
Yeah. So what is your role right now?
Well, I'm just a cook. I am here to supply food and make sure that it's properly heated and properly given out to people. We are getting from a catering company, though. So, I mean, that's another added layer of everything. But the facilities we work at aren't fixed to let us cook. So it's the only option for some people, especially the people who are in the hotel.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really all I do here is serve food and make sure that it's safe for people to eat.
Right.
And I have a question.
Yes, Eric.
I'm curious, you know, you hear about the availability of tests now, supposedly. You know, there's millions of tests. Why aren't like frontline food workers like yourself, you know, if they're so available, why aren't people being, you know, tested regularly and that area targeted for supposedly all the tests that are available?
You know, actually, there is a number people can call. That's what I had to do. I didn't get tested by the Army. I got tested by calling a number for New York State and then actually making an appointment to go and get it done.
Oh, it wasn't from the Army that was appointing it.
Oh, well, they mandated it. Like, they told me I had to do it,
Oh,
but it's
Yeah.
outside of the Army that does the actual testing and that you actually have to get the results back from.
okay.
Yeah, the problem with testing is if you tested people today, they might actually be positive tomorrow. So a test today is only good for that moment in time. And depending on how long it takes to get the test results back, you're just not going to know the answer. That's one part of it. The other is that while they say that there's a lot of tests available, they're holding those tests really for people that they think are positive. They're not testing everybody. For instance, the person that I know who passed away, his wife and son also got it. They tested his wife and himself, and then they concluded after they both tested positive, based on the symptoms of the third person, they said, well, you have it also. But technically, his number never showed up as a test positive. So there's, you know, you can multiply the number of, quote, test positives by how many people have had this. You know, you want to multiply it by 10, multiply it by 20, or maybe even multiply it by 100. Which is why a lot of people look at, as Bob has indicated, you know, the final stop of this thing is some version of herd mentality or immunization. Otherwise, this is just going to stay with us, and it may mutate one way or another, just as our normal flu mutates from year to year. But while it is deadly, it is not going to destroy the human race. That's kind of, you know, a big picture look at it. And unfortunately, many people are going to die. But I don't believe it's going to be like the Spanish flu, which killed 100 million people. But, you know, we will be susceptible to this until immunization happens, or your own body produces the immunization that you need for it, i.e. you get it and you recover from it, or you get a plasma transplant from somebody or something like that. And it becomes, and now it becomes part of what is our society going to look like going forward? And what is it going to look like when you go out to dinner with people? And how crowded a restaurant's going to be, or a bar, or a sports game. You know, they talk about playing baseball without crowds there or without anybody there. Or maybe there'll be a few hundred people in the stands, all separated. But that's a huge part of our economy, are these entertainment kinds of things. So it's going to be very challenging and very interesting to see where we go until we have a conclusive end to this. And even when we get a conclusive end to this, people will now be keenly aware that something like this could actually happen. And it's not just stuff that happens in movies. It could happen in real life.
I'm curious how you kind of wrap up things, your time. I know you're going on as a consultant at Cabot, but like how are you going to spend your next 3 weeks of life at Cabot?
Well, I told them that I really wanted to be a lame duck for a while, you know, just the guy that's there, and I don't have to answer questions or anything. But actually I am in the midst of a whole new base excess milk program for the co-op, which we are installing as of May 1st, which is we need to lower the amount of milk that's being made by 5% as a co-op. And so we're rolling that out. So I'm in the middle of making sure that this thing goes properly and that it's all installed by the end of May appropriately. So that's how I'm wrapping that part up. The senior leadership team that I was meeting with every day for the first month and then moved off to 3 times a week, we're trying 2 times this week to see how that goes. So there's less and less of my fingerprints on every day and what we're doing. And now it rolls back to bigger picture kinds of stuff. And the other thing that I'm working on, which is back to kind of normal, how do you make the business go a little better and how do you become more profitable, is licensing. So you are familiar with the dog treats a little bit because Noah's dog's on the cover. And now we're looking at Cabot popcorn, which would come out in a pepper jack, spicy pepper jack cheese, regular cheese, Vermont maple popcorn. And these would be done by an outside firm using our cheese, powdering our cheese and putting it on there. Obviously, the maple would be a different piece of that. And also a Cabot mac and cheese. So I'm busy doing some other types of things that aren't so much involved with the day-to-day movement of the business. I still have a first call in the morning that always is about milk, and it's about whether we're able to handle the milk or not. So 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, we dumped 35 loads of raw milk. So we've been able to whittle that down from 35 to about 25. Last week it was 15. This week we will dump no milk. So we're utilizing all of the milk again. And we're making some condensed skim, and we're shipping it as far as the Midwest to ice cream makers who are using it, because now the summer ice cream season is starting to heat up. So a little hand went up. I don't know what that means. Did you raise your hand?
A hand clap.
Oh, it's a hand clap. Oh, Noah will tell you, I'm not very good with emojis.
Come on, Dad, give it the program.
I can give them a lesson.
I know ones that like the face smiles, or the tongue goes out, or you do a okay.
How's that?
Or a thumbs up. I got thumbs up. All right. So yes, the ice cream makers are starting to go full tilt, and they use a lot of condensed skim in that product. So that's helpful in avoiding the dumping. So we're able now to to more balance our milk load. And as we get the farmers to take down the amount of milk that they're making by that 5%, then we'll be able to move that milk profitably. Right now, we're selling it, but we're losing money on the sale because there's such an abundance in the marketplace. So that's starting to feel calmer. And last month, we lost about $4 million because of excess milk. And in the month of May, we expect to trim that back to maybe we would lose $1 million based on excess milk. And then by June, we would be rebalanced and off to the races again.
Right. It's getting way down.
I'm looking for questions. Oh, no, it looks like you have a question. Your hand is up. Not just on somebody's shoulder, I know.
That's exactly what I was doing. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's what you thought you were doing, but I think you have a question.
Or do the Buttles look like you guys are unmuted? Do you have a question?
Thank you, Laurel.
Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Wilson Buttle? No, you don't? Okay. Okay. Noah, how about some Lagom Landing students? Do you have any questions?
I'm sure John has a question for you. Donnie?
John, he kind of answered my question.
Oh, terrible. I was just wondering, considering that, Dad, I'm going to be living with you for the next year, are you going to be this is more of a personal question. Are you going to be working from home? Or are you still going to be behind the scenes, at the office, or are you going to be on site?
No, I am going to probably be working from home when I'm working, probably 90% of the time. I'll very rarely need to go into the office. I've got this great room in the house now.
Yeah, it's my room. Leave it.
The desk is a little small, but if I can order a bigger desk, I think I would be all set.
Hey, don't make fun of my desk. All right, this is turning more into a personal issue between me and my dad. Anybody else have questions?
At any point while you were going through this plan, at any point did you think, oh my goodness, wait, this is not gonna work? Was there any extreme doubt because maybe you heard something on the news of this one thing, and then you heard something else on the news, and you're like, wow, maybe these weeks planned aren't gonna go as well as I think they are, or they're not gonna go well at all. At any point did you think that?
That's a great question, Natalie, because I absolutely felt exactly like that. So the first week, way back, the first week of March, when I was looking at how bad things appeared to be getting in Italy, I started to become really scared that we're not going to avoid this, and that we needed a plan, and that in a very fatalistic kind of look, no matter what plan we put in place isn't going to work, because this is coming here and it's going to overrun us, and there's kind of no way to stop it, and it's going to go through the population, and we're probably all going to starve, and my wife's a diabetic, so she's going to die. So now I'm going to be left alone with Noah and Ben, and who knows how that's going to go. And Noah's never going to want to stay at home, so that's going to be a problem. He's been roaming around, getting the disease, and bringing it back here, and had a very fatalistic attitude to the whole thing. And I figured it was pretty much over for us. But you know what? I talked to Rocky. And you know what Rocky told me?
What?
He said, C.S. Lewis said it best. It all ends badly for all of us. So sooner or later, it's going to happen. And then my wife told me, you got to snap out of this, because you're kind of a downer to be around. And nobody's gotten the virus, right? It really hadn't even arrived here. And meanwhile, I'm social distancing from her. Like I'm like, I'll sleep on the couch, you know, just in case I have the disease and I don't know it, and you have it and I don't know it, right? And when I was walking around at work, and remember, everybody is still at work and they're just doing their normal stuff. And I have my own office, and it's a little bit bigger than Noah's bedroom. So a nice big desk, and I got a round table in there. And generally speaking, 8 or 10 people could easily be in the office. Somebody would come in the office, and I would go, "That's far enough." I wanted to be like 20 feet away from everybody. They're like, "What is wrong with you?" And I go, "I don't know. You could have the virus." And I'm like, I do not have this crazy virus that everybody's talking about. I'm not going on a cruise ship or anything like that. Then I overhear people going, "Yeah, I'm going on a cruise later on in the month." I'm like, "We're never going to see you again if you go on a cruise. It's going to be over for you," right? And so I'm walking around like a crazy person, trying to figure out, okay, how do we get masks? And you know, and I'm listening to all this stuff about ventilators. I don't even know what a ventilator is, but I'm thinking maybe I should have one at the house, just in case, right? And if I can get in early, I can get all sorts of stuff. I decided to get to the grocery store. First one in, I got everything. I got like a month's worth of everything I needed. And then my wife discovered half of it in my trunk, and they were doing a food collection for the church, and she gave it all away. She gave away like my whole survival thing. Went to the church, and she's like, "Hey, you know, you could just buy more." I'm like, "I don't know if I can just buy more. I need to make sure that I have all of these things." And so the people at work were like, "Oh boy, the guy's nuts, right? But he's the boss, so we're going to start doing this stuff." Well, it turns out that 2 weeks later, when we instituted, you know, the second week of it, it suddenly clicked with 1,000 people that this thing's real, and it's going to be in your face. And by then, I'm now really relaxed because we got a plan, and we're checking people as they're coming in the building. And we built care teams, and we went after student nurses to bring them in to try to help us to identify sick people. And we started doing the social distancing, and everybody was thinking that we were crazy. And we stopped letting people eat lunch together. And we started to create a way for people to come in with their uniforms, take them off in one place, and then just keep walking out of the building, so that they never went back in and either recontaminated or got contaminated by somebody else. And then I started getting emails going, "Wow, this was really good. I'm really happy that you did this." And then and at that point we had built the plan to say, okay, when we think this is going to happen, we're going to need to do this, which was giving people more money. And then when we realized truck drivers would have a problem, making sure that they were getting meals. And so we were able to stay ahead of it. But when we first started forming the plan, I was scared to death. I was terrified when nobody else was terrified. And it worked out to be really well, because when they became terrified, I was already able to tell them, here's what we're going to do. And here's how we're going to do it. And a lot of the talk with the senior team in the first week, when they said, I don't think we need to meet every day. I said, we're going to need to meet every day. And so after the end of the first meeting, they were like, okay, so we're back on the phone tomorrow, right? Because we got a lot more to talk about when I go out and measure the people around me. But it gave them a real feel that we had a plan. There was something that they could work on, but they also knew that we were going to be flexible about putting it in place. And so one thing with my personality, if I have a plan, I'm okay. It's when you don't have a plan and you got this big unknown that fear will paralyze you. And so I talked to them the second day. I said, exactly that. Fear will paralyze you and you can't move forward. And the difference between what some people would say a coward and somebody that's a champion is their ability to get out of that same, they have exactly the same feelings, but one is able to just take that one step, a little leap of faith, and try to keep moving, as opposed to standing there just waiting for something to help kind of rescue them. And I was very fortunate because the team that I have, they all were willing to start taking that step forward. Yes, Laurel.
Actually, right soon after Natalie's question, a couple more people raised their hands. Well, my mom did in Colorado, and I unmuted her. I think maybe she wasn't sure how to unmute. So I got her unmuted. And then also Heather and Todd, my cousins out in Colorado Springs, Colorado. So do you guys want to pipe in?
I just wanted to tell you that Heather had a question.
Oh,
Okay.
that's what I'm trying to do. Okay.
Thanks, Jane.
Welcome.
I just had an interesting observation as I've heard like Lindsay and Vic and Ed and others talk about their communities and either restrictions that are or not in place and testing that is or isn't happening in among communities. And I think one of the big challenges is that there is such diversity, not even between states, but even within a state, as far as what are the rules. And so trying to figure out how do I follow what's being asked of me, and then going to another community, like we're talking about summer's coming on, people are going to want to go see their family, or they're going to want to take that cruise, which seems crazy that somebody's, wanting to do that right now, but people are going to want to do things, and it's not straightforward where to find that information of, is this okay in the particular community I'm going to? For example, Colorado Springs is doing, I think, quite a bit more opening than Denver is yet, or maybe other communities in Colorado, where my sister who lives in Buena Vista, a small mountain community, they have tried to lock down the county where they don't want anybody coming in, they don't want anybody leaving. Not very much is open. Colorado Springs has all stores open, hotels are open, pretty much everything but churches and restaurants. Doctor's appointments, preventative as well as elective surgeries, those kind of things are all happening now. And maybe I go to Denver and things are completely different, and where my sister lives is completely different. And so it will be interesting to figure out how we can stay true to whatever the places where we're in at the time.
Well, and Colorado Springs is the 6th most conservative city in the country, so and very understandably concerned about the destruction of business when everything stays closed,
Right.
And how much the mental health, the lack of revenue, all the different ripple effects that has on society. That some added risk is worth it to open up and have a tiny bit less destruction of your economy, and there's logic to that. It's just a matter of whether it just completely explodes, and we'll see. There's also a lot. I think I could see a lot of politics in the testing too. And, I heard somebody say testing is a political death sentence for certain people. So let's say we test everybody, and the whole world sees how many coronavirus cases we have, and we look bad, or one political party can use that against the other, or even say in Georgia, the mayor is concerned about opening up, and so they want a lot of testing, and maybe the governor doesn't want to give a bad perception, so he limits the testing some. So that's really, really hard. And like you said, you get a lawsuit and you say, I didn't have coronavirus today, but I have it tomorrow, and somebody goes after you. So it's tricky.
Yeah, we've never encountered anything like this, and hopefully we'll never encounter anything like this again. And I think you gave some great examples of places that are within driving distance that have completely different policies, but yet we live in such a free-floating society that unless you're going to put up guards outside of your town that say, do you have a registration that allows you in here, And if you come in here and you went from this place, you're going to be 14 days just sitting here doing nothing until we assess whether you're okay or not. So it's difficult to figure out what to do next, but we're an economy that's built on people having free access and free will to do a lot of stuff. And a lot of that stuff is entertainment oriented with other people. And I think we really have learned how much other people count in all of our lives. You know, as my wife said, rooming with friends isn't the same as having lunch with my friends. I really would like to get back to that. So, yes.
Yeah, we had Vic actually had her hand up too earlier. So between Vic and my dad, you guys can duke it out who wants to go first. Maybe if it's a follow-up on Colorado, it might make sense to keep talking Colorado. And thank you for Todd and Heather for that perspective. It's interesting to think with different areas being so different. So, yeah.
Ed, we sent a picture of Cabot cheese for your advertising.
Yes.
And is there a winner?
Well, it's not a winner. You just haven't seen the end result yet. So every week or 10 days, I send out to the employees different things. And so last week, I sent out a letter, a very heartfelt letter that came from one of our farmers, thanking the employees. And it was a person who really wrote this letter that said the co-op's going to have to make some incredibly hard decisions about how much milk they can take in and whether we can really survive as a organization. And all the while that she was writing this, she knew that her farm was not going to be one of the ones that survived. So it was really, really impactful. So I sent that out to the employees with a notice on it. A few weeks earlier, we had done a farm video. Before that, it was about essential workers. And so right now I have two in the works, and one is pictures from around the country of people holding up Cabot food. And basically the message is these are the people that want to thank you for continuing to process the food and get it out to us. Especially I like the one in Montana with the the big mountains in behind it. I thought that was pretty cool. But everybody has sent in some really great pictures, except for Lagom, who had like all the people crowded around one bar.
We got two more this week. We bought the bacon cheddar because they're phasing. You guys are phasing it out, so we had to get some.
So good.
It's really
bacon cheddar's coming back.
Oh, okay, that's good.
Okay, so you have to remember we had to cut back on the number of products we were getting so we could get the maximum pounds out to people. And now that we've gotten back to a stable level, we're going back and reintroducing all the various flavors that we cut back on. So.
All right. Vic had a question. I feel bad that you didn't get to ask.
You should probably wrap up.
And then we're kind of over our time, so let's hear from you.
Yeah. So I know I follow a lot of people who are disabled who have been talking about this a lot, and this is more about Cabot in particular rather than specifically the pandemic, but a lot of people have been saying how the pandemic is forcing us to work from home and to be as far away from the workplace as possible. And I know a lot of people like working at home in a different way than they do at work. I was wondering if you were going to, after this is all over, if Cabot was going to start implementing those sort of things for the disabled workers who might not be able to get to work every day because of their disability, or workers who find it harder to get to work.
Yeah, I think it does open up another avenue for people that are physically handicapped that can't maybe travel as easily as other people. We've had a very small workforce that has worked outside of the office, but I believe that this will change our opinion of that going forward, because we're amazed at how well it's actually worked. And for most of the people who have worked in an office for a long time, and in some cases have said, I really would like to work from home, they've really discovered they don't like working from home so much. Working from home is nice once or twice a week, but it's not nice every day. And they miss that human contact that they had. But it does open up a new portion of the workforce that we probably haven't considered for remote jobs. The one thing that we have an advantage on in this case is that these people all worked together to begin with, so they knew each other. So when you start working remotely, you don't have to learn new people in a remote aspect. And it is easier to do this way. But you know what? 5 or 10 years ago, we never could have done this. The technology was not such that we could have linked ourselves in a way that we could have made the company go. So if this had happened that many years ago, our food supply from Cabot would have probably stopped. We just wouldn't be able to manipulate the distribution network that was needed in order to keep it going. We could cut the cheese and we could put it in a warehouse, but we couldn't get it to the next level, which is the problem with the food banks in the cities right now, is they don't have a network for distribution once the food gets there. I'm looking around for.
All right, I think we are gonna kind of let you go, because you've been with us for 3 weeks in a very busy month of your life, and what a great gift it's been. Yeah, lots of people clapping hands. I've heard from so many people what a great and informational time it's been. Yeah. And so thank you so much.
It's been a lot of fun for me, and it's always nice to connect to Cabot fans across the country.
Excellent. Yeah. And then just for Lagom Landing, little wrap up here. It's a month of transition for us too. I was going to just let everybody, Rock just said sell syrup. We have a little bit of syrup. We actually don't have a whole lot. So, but our students have a little bit to sell. Yes. So they are trying to sell a little bit of their last bit. And then we are going to have a Speaking with Bread with our students from last year, which is our event that we gather once a month. We used to gather in person. Now we're gathering over Zoom. But students from last year, Matt Simone, whose mother is on this call, Julie, and Jake Hagan are going to join us on Zoom and talk with our students kind of about where they are a year after Lagom Landing. And so that's going to be on May 20th at 7 o'clock. And then our final wrap up of the year is normally a pig roast, but we're going to have a virtual pig roast, which will make Vic really glad because the pig won't really be roasted. But we'll have the band that normally plays at our pig roast is going to play, and just we'll have a kind of Zoom session of
kid speeches.
All of that going on. Students are going to be making speeches, and probably about 2 hours. We haven't finalized the time, but it is on May 30th, probably from 1 to 3. So you'll be sending out info on that as well. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Great hanging out a few weeks in a row with everybody. And will you
be glad to
close us in prayer, Rocky, since you were referenced as being a spiritual guide to Ed Townley during this time?
All right. God, we are indeed vulnerable creatures, each and every one of us, and we all shake and quake in our own different ways, and probably some of us should quake and shake a little bit more. And we know that life on life terms is going to do that to all of us in some way or another, but right now there is a lot of people just going through things that are really unimaginable, and so we pray for a real turning to a power greater than themselves, just an opening of the heart, sharing amongst each other the ways we can help each other and really be there for each other. And may we all kind of examine ways in which we can step up to the plate too. So we trust you in this whole process, and continue to just look to you and to one another for that daily little inspiration. And thank you for this time. Thank you for Ed. And we pray just continued protection for Cabot's and all that it does for the people that it employs and the people that it feeds. So thank you, thank you, thank you, and help, help, help. Amen.
Amen. Hey, Noah, call home.
Ah.
All right.
All right, God bless everybody.
Bye, family.
I don't know why you're laughing, Natalie. I haven't heard from you all week.
Ah!